I placed 3 items on the glass table: the key fob to the executive suite, the durable power of attorney document, and a single red envelope, the kind you get for Lunar New Year. The glass was cool and unforgiving under my fingertips. From the 40th floor, the city was a silent, twinkling grid. Up here, the only sound was the low, expensive hum of the climate control, a sound I'd chosen, calibrated, and maintained for a decade. I didn't say a word. I just placed them, one after the other, each click and whisper of paper, a period at the end of a sentence no one else had heard me writing. This story isn't about that moment, not really. It's about the silence that built it. My silence. The architecture of it. My name is, well, it doesn't matter anymore. But for 70 minutes, this is my confession. It starts with cake. Isn't that ridiculous? The foundational memory of my life's work, and it's a grocery store sheet cake with thick, sugary roses. I was 9. My sister, Elise, was turning 7. Our house was a chaos of shrieking kids and balloon animals twisting into dogs that looked like giraffes. The smell was a punch in the face. Popcorn, synthetic strawberry icing, the wet dog scent of damp grass tracked onto carpet. Through the kitchen doorway, I saw my mother. Her back was to the party, her shoulders tense. She was hunched over the cake, a tube of red icing in her hand, her tongue peeking out in concentration. "Mom?" I said. She jumped, smearing a tiny crimson line. "Oh, sweetie, the bakery spelled her name wrong. It says Elsie. I'm trying to fix it." The L was a wobbly, thickened mess, the icing piled on like a scar. "I can do it," I said. I don't know why. She looked at me, then at the cake, her eyes tired. She handed me the tube. "Just make it look like the others." I didn't. I saw the problem. The botched L was a lost cause. So I took a toothpick, meticulously scraped away the excess, turning the smudge into the stem of a lopsided extra flower. I blended it into the existing garden of roses. It wasn't perfect, but you wouldn't notice the mistake unless you knew where to look. My mother peered over my shoulder, her breath a sigh of relief against my ear. "There, perfect. You're so good with the behind-the-scenes things." She swept up the cake, carried it into the roaring light of the living room where Elise in a tiara was holding court. The cheers swallowed everything. I stayed in the quiet kitchen, licking the too sweet red icing from my finger, the chemical cherry taste a warning I was too young to decipher. Behind the scenes, that was the first brick. Our family business wasn't built on charisma, my father would say, but on spine. Liang and Sons Development. Sons, plural, a hopeful prophecy that died with my mother's hysterectomy. So it was just him and then us. The spine was the wiring, the plumbing, the permits, the load-bearing calculations, the quiet negotiation with city inspectors who held our fates in their greasy hands. My father was a structural engineer. His world was one of forces, tensions, and invisible strengths. Elise got his smile, his easy laugh that could disarm a room. I got his graph paper, his relentless need for order. On Saturday mornings, he'd take us to the job sites. For Elise, it was a playground. She'd climb onto the makeshift piles of drywall, her laughter echoing in the empty steel skeleton. "Daddy, look at me! I'm on top of the world!" He'd beam, snapping pictures. For me, he had a different ritual. He'd hand me a clipboard. "Walk with me." We'd move through the chaos, the shriek of saws and the shouted Spanish of the framers. He'd point. "See that beam? The one with the temporary support? It's carrying the weight of the entire west wall until the concrete cures. If you pull that support out too early," he'd make a collapsing sound with his mouth, "the whole face falls off. But no one will ever see it. It'll be buried behind drywall. That's the work that matters." I'd nod, gripping the clipboard, checking off the items on his list. I was the record keeper, the one who remembered. The scaffold.
Elise's brilliance was different. It was public. By 16, she was giving presentations to my father's investors, her voice clear and compelling. I'd be in the back, running the PowerPoint clicker, making sure her graphs were seamless, her data impeccable. At home, after one triumphant dinner, my father poured a rare scotch. He looked at Elise, his eyes shining. "You," he said, his voice thick with pride, "you are the face of this family's future." He didn't look at me. The ice cube in his glass cracked loudly in the quiet. That sound. That was the sound of a foundational shift, a settling. I just drank my water. The scaffold doesn't flinch. I went to college for business and structural engineering, a dual degree, a practical choice. Elise went for communications and public relations. Brand narrative, she'd say on her rare calls, the buzz of a party in the background. It's all about the story you tell. My father's health began its slow, insidious decline my senior year. A series of small strokes, TIAs, the doctor called them, little whispers of mortality. Each one stole a piece of his precision. He'd forget a clause in a contract, misremember a zoning code. The first time it happened, he slammed his fist on his oak desk, a crack echoing in the quiet office. "You handle it!" he growled, not at me, but at the space I occupied. So I did. I renegotiated. I soothed the client. I filed the amended forms. I became the silent patch in the growing cracks of his genius. When he officially stepped down, the transition was presented as a coronation. For Elise. There was a party at a downtown gallery. White walls, champagne flutes, the clink of toasts. My father, leaning on a cane, put his arm around Elise. "My daughter," he announced, his voice only slightly slurred, "will be the new CEO of Liang Developments. The future is bright." The applause was a physical wave. I stood by the catering table, nursing a seltzer, watching. A board member, an old friend of my father's named Carl, sidled up to me. He smelled of cigar smoke and bourbon. "Someone's got to keep the lights on, right?" he said, clapping me on the back. "Good man." He wandered off. I looked down at my shoes, polished to a dull sheen. The scaffold. Always the scaffold. The official title they gave me was Director of Operations. My office had no windows. It was adjacent to the server room, and the constant low thrum of the cooling fans became my white noise. Elise's office saw glass and light and city views, was on the other side of the floor. Our relationship settled into a new rhythm. She'd breeze in, the scent of her perfume, something expensive and floral, fighting the smell of ozone and warm circuitry. "I need the financials for the Midtown project, simplified. Board meeting in an hour." Or, "The mayor's aide is coming. Can you make sure the 3D model for the waterfront development is running smoothly? Last time it glitched." It was always a request, never a discussion. My job was to translate her vision into reality, to smooth the path, to ensure the face of the company was flawless.
The unraveling didn't begin with a bang. It began with an email. Sent folder, 11:47 p.m., a Friday. I'd stayed late, as always, to run the weekly system backups. The notification ping was soft in the silent office. It was from Elise's account, to the entire board. The subject line, Forward-Looking Strategy and Leadership Structure. I opened it. It was a beautifully crafted message, outlining a bold new 5-year plan. My eyes scanned down. There was a proposed org chart. At the top, her name, CEO. Branching out below, new positions. Head of Public Engagement, Chief Vision Officer. My title, Director of Operations, was buried 3 layers down, under a newly created VP of Logistics, a box with a TBD next to it. My name wasn't anywhere in the narrative of the email, not a mention. The blood in my ears sounded like the ocean in a shell. I sat there, and the blue light of my monitors, the fan hum my only companion. I read it again and again. The silence in that email was louder than any dismissal. The details after that became sharp, devastating little shards. A company newsletter featured a photo of Elise on a construction site, hard hat on, pointing at something off camera. The caption, CEO Elise Liang, providing hands-on leadership for our next generation of projects. I was the one who'd been on that site for 3 days straight, solving the drainage issue that would have delayed the pour. I was the one who took the photo. Then came the dinner, at my father's house, now eerily quiet, smelling of antiseptic and steamed ginger. He was in a wheelchair. Elise was feeding him soup, telling him a funny story about a TV interview. I was updating his medical binder. My father patted her hand. "My shining girl." His eyes, milky now, drifted to me. "And you, still in the engine room?" He meant it kindly. A fact. Elise laughed, airy and bright. "Oh, he's the best in the business, Dad. I couldn't do any of it without him behind the scenes." That phrase, again, a lifetime later, and it still landed with the weight of a coffin lid. The final shard was a folder, a simple, misplaced manila folder on the chair in Elise's office. I'd gone in to leave the finalized contracts for her to sign. It was labeled Reorg, Confidential. Inside was a memo from a high-priced consultancy, a streamlining proposal. It recommended consolidating operational oversight under a more centralized, outward-facing leadership model. It suggested offering a generous severance package to redundant back-office management to ensure a smooth cultural transition. A list of names followed. Mine was at the top. A handwritten note in Elisa's looping script was in the margin. Discuss with board, sensitive. The pen had pressed so hard it had nearly torn the paper. I didn't react. I didn't cry or rage or confront. That's not what the scaffold does. The scaffold holds. It observes. It calculates load bearing. I placed the folder back exactly as I found it. I walked back to my windowless office. The hum of the servers seemed different now. Not a white noise, but a countdown. I sat in the dark, and I made a decision. I would not be streamlined. I would not be offered a severance package. I would execute a controlled demolition. It took 6 months of perfect, patient silence. I became a ghost in the machinery. I accessed everything, not just my work, but the hidden strata. The shell companies my father had set up in his sharper days, now dormant. The private trusts, the power of attorney documents I'd quietly had updated after his last major stroke. Documents that named me, not Elise, as the sole decision-maker for his assets, which included his controlling share in the company. I'd done it because someone had to, because it was practical. Now, it was strategic. I traced every financial conduit, every contractual obligation. I didn't steal. I mapped. I understood the spine of the entire edifice, every vertebra, every nerve cluster. Elise was busy being the face, cutting ribbons, giving quotes to Forbes. She was hanging magnificent tapestries on the walls. She never noticed I was quietly, brick by brick, removing the mortar. The day of the board meeting arrived, the one where the reorg was on the agenda. I wore a gray suit. I felt preternaturally calm. I carried a simple leather folio. The meeting room was all cool tones and suppressed sound. The long table, the smell of coffee and expensive cologne. Elise was at the head, radiant in emerald green. She was mid-sentence, talking about synergy and paradigm shifts when I entered. I didn't go to my usual seat at the foot of the table. I walked to the sideboard, the one with the water pitchers and glasses. The room quieted. Eyes followed me. Elisa's smile tightened. "We're in the middle of something, if you don't mind." I didn't look at her. I poured a glass of water. The clink of the pitcher was monstrously loud. I took a slow sip. Then I turned, walked to the center of the table, and opened my folio.
Item 7 on the agenda is the proposed restructuring, I said, my voice flat, clear, and utterly foreign to my own ears. Board members will find a packet in front of them. It details my father's irrevocable trust structure, his medical incapacity certification from Dr. Armand, and the durable power of attorney that grants me full authority over his 51% voting share.
Elise's face was a masterpiece of confusion curdling into disbelief. What is this? This is a private board matter. You can't just... Page 4, I continued, as if she hadn't spoken, is a summary of liabilities tied to the 3 shell companies my father used for the Greystone project. Liabilities that, due to a personal guarantee, are now coming due. The proposed streamlining does not account for this $14 million contingency. It would bankrupt the public-facing company within 18 months. A board member, Carl, the one who'd clapped my back, sputtered, "This is outrageous. Elise, did you know about this?" Elise was pale. This is a misunderstanding. These documents, he's taken them out of context. Page 7, I said, my finger resting on the final sheet in my own copy, is my offer. I will assume the role of interim CEO. I will personally negotiate the settlement of the Greystone liabilities using my understanding of the original off-book agreements. I will stabilize the spine of this company. The public face, the branding, the vision, that remains Elise's domain. President, head of narrative, whatever title she chooses. But operational, financial, and legal control rests with the majority shareholders designee, which is me. The silence was absolute. You could hear the HVAC sighing. You could hear Elise's prick shallow breaths. She stared at me, her eyes searching for the brother she knew, the silent partner, the fixer. He was gone. In his place was the silent architect, the one who'd built the structure she was standing on and who knew exactly which beam to gently tap to make the whole thing shiver. You planned this, she whispered, not a question. No, I said, finally meeting her gaze. I understood it. You were busy building a monument. I was making sure the ground beneath it wouldn't open up and swallow it whole. I closed my folio. The soft click was a period. The vote is a formality, given the share structure, but I'd appreciate your discussion. I'll be in my office. I didn't have an office with a view. Not yet, but I would. I walked out. The sound of my Oxfords on the polished concrete floor was the only sound in the world. I didn't look back. That was 2 years ago. The aftermath is quiet. The company is more profitable than ever. The Greystone mess is a closed chapter. Elise is still the face. She gives the speeches, wins the awards. We speak in brief, efficient emails. The family dinners are over. My father is in a beautiful, quiet care facility overlooking the sea. He doesn't remember the company or the fight. Sometimes he holds my hand and calls me by his brother's name. I sit in the corner office now. The glass table is mine. The city grid is mine to contemplate. And sometimes, in the deep silence of the night, I think about that scaffold, the one my father taught me about, the temporary support that holds up the beautiful face until the structure can stand on its own. The terrible, beautiful truth I learned is this. Sometimes the scaffold is the structure. The face is just decoration. The silence isn't emptiness. It's the space where the real work is done. The calculations, the bearing of weight. I am no longer behind the scenes. I am the scene. And the silence I built, brick by brick, word by withheld word, is the most powerful thing I will ever say. The red envelope I placed on the table that night, it was empty, a symbol. But I finally understand what was inside it all along. It was my voice, and I had just begun to spend it.